Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Ajnana Dhimirandhasya, Jnananjana Shalakaya, Chakshurun Militam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mada cha Pita Tvameva, Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva, Tvameva Vidya Dravinam Tvameva, Tvameva Sarvam Amriteshwari Ma, Tvameva Sarvam Amriteshwari Ma, Tvameva Sarvam Amriteshwari Ma. Om Amriteshwari Nama. I'm sorry for the late start due to some technical problems, but we'll begin now. Kindly sit straight and make sure your vertebral column, your spinal column is erect. And sit comfortably. Slowly close your eyes. And let's now chant Om 3 times. As we chant Om, imagine the sound of Om to arise from your navel area and visualize the sound traveling upwards along your spine. Kindly take a deep breath. Feel the relaxation, and by feeling the reverberations of Om in each and every cell of your body. Slowly bring your awareness onto your breathing. Breathing normally but with full awareness of each and every inhalation and exhalation.
Can you check the stream? Are you checking it?
Now as you breathe in along with your in-breath, chant the mantra Ma silently along with your in-breath. And when you breathe out, chant Om. Ma when you breathe in, and Om when you breathe out. Ma is a representation of divine love and Om of divine light. You don't have to imagine love and light, just feel the vibrations of love and light in your heart. And after you've breathe in Ma, now kindly pause for a few seconds. Don't hold your breath for too long. And then breathe out Om. So it's like this. Ma. And continue like this for some time. slowly and slowly, the reverberations of Ma and Om become more and more subtle. You can just feel the reverberations of the love and light in your heart. Imagine your heart being filled with that vibrations of love and light. Imagine your heart to be filled with that love, the light, compassion, peace. Imagine this peace and love going out from your heart to all the beings in this world. And as the light falls on each and every one of them, imagine they also become more loving, more peaceful, and more content. And while imagining so, we'll chant the Loka Samasta prayer 9 times. Om Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. 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 Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Can you turn off the mic in the phone? That's what I thought. Yeah. So let's ask Varun if it is coming or not. Let's be honest. Yeah, you have to do it with camera. No, you do it from there. I did. I can't do it. You just turn it from the and then from
Amriteshwarya Namah. Om Dhyayamo Dhulabakundhanavatim Tejomayim Naishtikim Snigdha Pangavilokinim Bhagavatim Mandasmidashremukhim Valsalyamritavarshinim Sumadhuram Sankirtanalaphinim Shamangim Madhasikta Suktim Amridanandatmikam Ishwarim. Om Narayanam Padmabhum Vasishtam Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Narayanam Padmabhuvam Vasishtam Shaktim Cha Tatputram Parasharam Cha Vyasam Shugam Gaudavadam Mahandam Govinda Yogindram Athasya Shishyam Sri Shankaracharyam Athasya Padmapadam Cha Hastamalagam Cha Shishyam Tam Todagam Vartikagaryamanyan Asmat Gurum Santadam Manadosmi. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha.
Ask him how's the sound now. I cut the audio from that camel. Yeah, I did. Ask him how it is.
In the last session, we had seen about how Rishabha had relinquished his kingdom, and he had made his son Bharata, and Bharata was the eldest son of Rishabha, and after Bharata, it was known as Bharatam, and so Bharata became the king. And when Bharata became the king, he ruled for a long time, and after that he also relinquished his position as the king, and he appointed his children as successors. And we saw that what he did was he went to the ashrama known as the Pulashrama, and it was by the river Chakra Nadi, and and he started doing severe penance. That's what happened to Bharata. And we were looking at how Bharata was doing all the ablutions every day, and he's doing his daily rites, sitting on the bank of the river. And one day, as he was doing his daily practices, a solitary doe approached the river bank to quench her thirst. While she was drinking the water, the terrifying roar of a lion was heard from the neighborhood. The timid doe of tremulous glances was frightened beyond measure by that roar, and while still in the act of drinking, sprang to the other shore with a wild and distracted look in her eyes. Being big with young, she delivered even while springing due to the shock that fear generated, and the young one thereupon fell into the current of the river. Fear, delivery, the act of springing, separation from the flock, the cumulative effect of all these circumstances distressed her so much that she fell down dead in a cave on the other side. So the doe, which was trying to spring, and when suddenly heard the roar of the lion, it just sprang into the water, and then because of the shock, it gave birth to its child, and then it died and went to the other side. So the Rajarishi Bharata saw that forlorn and engendered calf of the deers being swept down by the current of the river. Overcome with pity for the motherless newborn, he caught it and brought it to his ashrama. So the Rajarishi means a king who has become the Rishi now, was now possessed with the idea that the fawn was his own and consequently got infatuated with it. So when Bharata saw this doe, he felt so much of compassion. And when he felt the compassion that there's a motherless fawn and he had to take care of it, he had a sense of responsibility to look after the fawn, the child. And as soon as he saw this and he took it, saw the fawn, he pulled it out of water and then took it to his ashram and was taking care of it. And then he had not completed his spiritual practices. So what he did, he went back to complete his spiritual practice, and suddenly in his mind he thought, oh, what will the fawn be doing now? And then when he went back and to look at it, it was shivering with cold. Then he dressed it with some straw and covered it with cloths and did all these things. And then again he tried to do his spiritual practices, but slowly and slowly what happened? His mind was completely filled with this small deer, the fawn. And he daily fed it, fattened it, protected it from enemies, fondled it, and in every way tried to please it. So in proportion to increase of his interest in it, his zeal for devotional practices declined until he gave them up totally after some time. So in the beginning, he was doing some practices, and you just have to imagine this is the person who was doing a lot of practices. The whole day he spent. And why did he come here? What was the reason why he came to the Pulashrama? He came to do his spiritual practices. But now, because of the attachment to the fawn, he completely forgot why he came and what was the reason. And he started looking after the deer, and the deer became part and parcel of his life. And he kept feeding the deer and looking at the deer, making sure it gets fat every day, and making sure it is protected from all the wild animals in the forest. And then every day when he used to go to fetch the fruits and his food from the forest, he would take the deer along with him, carry it on his shoulders, and he used to get so much pleasure while doing it. And he fondled the deer, and he looked at it as a small child, his own small child. And soon he completely forgot what was the main reason why he came here. So the main lesson from this is, it's not that you should not have compassion. So some people may ask this question, shouldn't I have compassion when you see some things like this? Definitely, that's not, it's not that we should not have compassion, but we should have compassion without attachment. So how do we inculcate that? So again, when we look at Amma is the greatest example for this. Amma, when somebody comes to her with so much sorrow, and she would identify with them. And if they are crying, then she would also start crying. And then she would listen to them. And at that moment, she is the most compassionate person in the world. And she is giving her full attention to that person. But the moment that person gets up and goes away, and the next person might be a small baby, and it will be just coming and clinging on Amma and kissing her and then making her laugh. So the question then one would ask is, was she acting as if she was sad? No. At that moment, at that particular moment, she was completely, as I said, completely identified with that particular devotee, and at the same time detached. And she knew that devotees, or the pain that she feels in her heart, was the devotee's pain, and it's completely detached from her. She has nothing to do with it. So similarly, we should have compassion. It's not that we should not have compassion, but at the same time, it should be detached. And we should, as Amma says, we should know the nature of this. Like for example, the question many people may ask is, should I not love my children? Should I not have compassion to my family? Of course, you should have. But you have to understand that one day or the other, when the children grows up and they have to leave you, they have to go to college, they have to lead their lives, they will get married, and when they get married, they will have their husband or wife or partner, and what happens is they will move away from the family, your family, and they will start their own family. And at that time, there is no point in crying, saying that, oh, my child, I love the child so dearly, now look at it. And especially if you get if your son or your daughter, that matter, gets a Bhadrakali or a real fierce Shiva, they will keep you away from your children, right? Your daughter-in-law or your son-in-law can act like an impediment. And then you have to expect all these things that's going to happen. So what you need to understand here is, you have to have compassion with detachment. That is real attachment. So the real attachment is not having any kind of attachment to that particular situation, but having discrimination along with that attachment. So it's not just indiscriminate attachment, but attachment with discrimination is real compassion. So here, so what happens is, he completely stopped his spiritual practices. And so he thought, alas, the swift moving action of the wheel of time has separated this poor fawn from his parents and his flock, and it has taken refuge with me as his father, mother, brother, relative, and friend. And putting his trust entirely in me, he knows no one else. So this is how the mind starts behaving when you have attachment. You're saying that the mind will come with 100 or thousands of reasons why you should spend your time with that particular person or with that situation. Why? Because there is nobody else. I am the only savior, and there's no father, no mother, no brother, no relative. We forget that who brought them here. I mean, of course, they came, if they're children, they came through our body, but doesn't mean that we did even an iota of things, because the child grew inside our body, and it was completely cared for by nature, and when it came out also, it was cared for nature. And even after that, the body is cared by all the 5 elements: the fire, water, earth, and air, and space. So it has nothing to do with us, but we feel the responsibility. Suddenly we feel so much responsibility and say that, oh, I have to take care of this. Otherwise, the world is going to end. So he said, putting his entire trust entirely in me, he knows no one else. That's why the poor fawn, how did the fawn come from? Where did the fawn come from? It came from its mother, and it just accidentally came there. So even at the expense of my own interest, I am bound to protect, nourish, fondle, and in every way look after the interests of this calf of a deer, knowing as I do the sin of abandoning one who has sought refuge. So again, he's making his argument stronger by saying that if I abandon, I will incur sin. If I abandon the fawn, I will be incurring sin. So this is how the mind keeps working. And many a worshipful person who followed the path of peace and service of the afflicted has, for the sake of such work, abandoned his own self-interest in important matters. So again, the mind is arguing and saying that, this is kind of seva. Doing this is also seva. That's how we easily slip into going out of spiritual practices, because we think, we are doing seva. And when we do all these things, we feel that, we are doing a selfless action. But it is not selfless, it is selfish. Whereas the mind keeps saying it is selfless. And so you can take time off from your spiritual practices. So in this way, getting infatuated with the fawn, he always came to be accompanied by it while sitting, lying, walking, standing, or eating. And fearing that it might be attacked by dogs or wolves, he took it also with him whenever he went out to collect grass, flour, fuel, leaves, fruits, trees, roots, and water. And whenever it stopped on the way, interested in something or other, he took it on his shoulders or lap or embraced it and enjoyed intense delight in doing so. And even when he was engaged in worship, he would now and then get up and have a look at the fawn to assure himself that it was safe, and would pronounce his blessings on it, saying, "May you live safe without any danger befalling you." So if for a time it would not be seen nearby, he would become grief-stricken like one who has lost his all. Owing to the intensity of his attachment to it, he felt heartbroken at its absence, and bemoaning over its fate, repeatedly he would, in the most pitiable way, say to himself, "Ah, would this pitiable young deer, orphaned by its mother doe, come back at all to me, trusting me to be a good man out of its own innocence, overlooking the perversities of luckless fellow like myself, cruel and mean like a hunter. Shall I ever see it, thanks to the protecting hand of the Lord, browsing somewhere in the woodlands of this ashrama?" So whenever the deer used to run away from him, so his mind would follow the deer, and he would become so heartbroken, and he was thinking, will the wild animals eat it, and will the deer ever come back to him? And he said he was thinking that, "I hope it has not been eaten up by a predatory creature, a wild dog or a wolf, moving about singly or in herds." And sun, the universal benefactor and the repository of Vedas, is about to set, and the fawn, a treasure deposited with me for safe custody by that doe, has not yet returned. Will that gem of a fawn come back to my unlucky self and delight his own folk with its childish frolics? As it plays about, I sit there with my eyes half closed in fake samadhi. It approaches me in a mood of love quarrel for not participating in its play, and in order to know whether I am really in samadhi, prods me with the tip of his horn, soft like water, with a show of great hesitation and fright. And when he pulls away the grass where the harvest, that is the sacrificial offerings for devas, is arranged, I happen to take him to task of the same. Then, like any boy of the hermitage, he withdraws from all play and remains motionless with all his limbs controlled. So this is what slowly happened. And when he would sit with the deer to do his spiritual practices, he will pretend as if he has closed his eyes and being in fake meditation or samadhi. And then the deer would come and check whether he's really in meditation or not. So it will prod him with its horn. The horn, it was since it was a very young deer, it had the tip of the horn was so soft, and would prod him, and he used to get so much delight. So this, I don't have to tell all of you, this is what happens to most of us when we come, when we have children, and or when we go and try to sit for meditation. This is what happens. And at that moment, children come to us running and hug us and start playing with us. So we naturally get pulled by that kind of a love, and that is the end of our sadhana. What great austerities must this land have done to deserve this good fortune of being marked with the tiny and beautiful hoof prints of this young black bug? For these hoof prints, besides cheering me with the prospect of tracing the whereabouts of their owner, make this land a suitable holy place for the performance of all sacred rites by those who seek heavenly felicity and worldly welfare. So this also, because when we talk about our children, then we'll say, my child, what he does, and just go on praising the whole day. And we are not even worried about the other person is listening or not. We say our child is such a great prodigy, or such a great artist, or this thing and that thing, and he does this thing, he just stands on one leg, or stands on one hand, and does this thing, and the whole day is gone describing about what our child does. So similarly, he does this thing. Here also Bharata says, I'm having so much of a blessing because of this deer. Think about this deer. And this is really actually a blessing for the ashram. And referring to the mark of the deer found in the disk of the rising moon, he would say, it is that the moon has taken for protection this poor motherless fawn, seeing that it has now strayed away from the precincts of this ashrama. And the loss of this fawn, which is like a son to me, is scorching the land lotus of my heart like a forest fire. Are you, O moon, intending to quench that heat by the cool and refreshing water from your face, augmented by the sight of my condition as I go about pitiably in search of my young deer? So he goes on like this, getting attached and more attached. And thus, distressed by vague and baseless fears, the Rajarishi was led to stray away completely from his practice of yoga, austerities, and the worship of the Supreme Lord by his own prarabdha karma, the destiny in the shape of a deer calf. So what happened here was, why did this happen? So it is the prarabdha karma that came in the form of a deer. So, or in the fawn. So his prarabdha karma came like that. So even if he moved away from all the kingdom, thinking that nobody should disturb me, I should not get attached to my grandchildren, I should not get attached to my children or grandchildren or all the other things in my kingdom, and then he moved to the forest. Just imagine, what did he face finally? This fawn came to him in the form of karma. So how can it be attributed to anything else other than prarabdha karma, that is destiny? And in the case of one like this Rajarishi, who had abandoned even his sons, considering them to be an obstacle in the spiritual quest, what other explanation can be given? Thus the Rajarishi Bharata happened to slide away from the path of yoga and engage himself completely absorbed in the protection, feeding, fondling, etc. of the fawn, devoid of all thoughts regarding the Atman, the Supreme Consciousness. So he completely abandoned all his spiritual practices. So what happened was then the deer moved away. And then when the deer moved away, he thought, oh, he was so sad for some time. And then he was in the evening of his life. Death was approaching. And he said, just as the hour that is inevitable for everyone, that of death, approached him irresistible pace, just like a serpent gliding towards a rat in its hole. So what happened was, in one sense, he thought like, oh my God, at least the deer is away. And when the deer is away, he can die peacefully. So thinking about God. But at that moment, the deer appeared at the time of death. And so what happened was, he was looking at the fawn by his side, as if it were a son in mourning sitting beside him. And he left his body and the deer behind, with his mind firmly fixed on the ladder. So, as in Bhagavad Gita, as Lord Krishna says, at the time of death, whatever you think, leaving the body, you become that. So what happened is, though his whole body was dead, his consciousness of the experiences of that birth was not lost. So following the fate of an ordinary man under such circumstances, he was born as a deer in the next life. So what happened? So because he left his body thinking about the deer, he was born as a deer in the next life. But because he did so much of austerities, and again in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna reiterates that even if you do 5 mantras, that 5 mantras will be retained in the next birth also. So because of all the penances and the austerities he did, he retained the memory of his past birth. And thanks to the power of his adoration of the Supreme Lord, he remembered even in the deer body the cause of his birth in such a frame, and said to himself with an anguished mind, alas, alas, what a pity that I have fallen from the ways of spiritually accomplished. My mind was completely offered at the feet of the Lord, and not a bit of my time was wasted in any occupation other than the thought of the Lord. And residing in the solitude of a holy forest ashrama, after abandoning all attachments of life, my mind was entirely fixed on the Lord and the soul of all souls, completely absorbed in the devotional disciplines of hearing, praising, remembering and worshipping, and in unbroken contemplation. Not a minute was spent in vain purposes. So that was what he was doing. But alas, the fool that I was, my mind in the end went too far after that deer, with the disastrous consequences that have followed. So what happened? So he took now the body of the deer, and still he's remembering, he's reminiscing all the things that he had done in his previous life. So unknown to all, the Bharata deer was thus full of renunciation within. So even though he had the body of a deer, he was full of renunciation. He knew about his past life. So that is the beauty of a sadhak. Even if you fall away from the path in that particular life or in that particular janma, in the next birth, what happens is you come back. You slowly come back to that. This is what is being shown here. So therefore he left the deer, what did the deer do? He left his mother, doe, and his place of birth, and migrated to that spot where the ashramas of Pulastya and Pulaha, which had an abundance of palm trees and which was dear to holy men because of the manifest presence of the divine. So he moved away from the forest where he was living with his mother, and he moved to closer to an ashram. And then keeping himself aloof from the company of others out of fear of the consequences, and moving about alone, feeding on dry leaves, grass roots, etc., and biding the exhaustion of the prarabdha karma that had brought him to this strait, he awaited the dawn of his last day. And at last, when it came, he abandoned his dear body in the holy waters of the river there. So he had to exhaust that karma, because when he died in his previous birth as Bharata, he died thinking about the deer, so he had to be born as a deer. But yet, what did the deer do? The deer remembered. The deer remembered its previous janma, their life, birth, and kept on continuing his spiritual. Even what happens is in an animal body, one thing is that you cannot do spiritual practices, correct? But one thing you can do is make sure that you don't fall down in spirituality. One of the main problems in spirituality is, even if you don't do spiritual practices, you have to make sure that you don't fall down by doing bad karmas or by accumulating more and more new karma. So what you do is, all you do is you just refrain from doing more bad karmas. So in that way, so what happens is, in the next birth, after this particular birth that you get out of your prarabdha karma, in the next birth you get a new and better birth. So you're not falling down. You're not giving away to all the animalistic tendencies. So just like the deer, what did the deer do? It moved away from all the other animals. It moved alone, and it went to the ashram and just ate whatever it got there from the ashram. And listened. It just sat there and listened to all the the Vedic chanting, the bhajans, and whatever was going there in the ashram. So that way, it did not let its mind go down to those animalistic tendencies. So as a result of which, what happened? So Sri Shuka said, there was a Brahmana boy in the Gotra of Angiras, noted for such qualities as control of the mind and the senses, austerity, Vedic study, Vedic teaching, generosity, joyous temperament, forbearance, humility, knowledge of Vedic rituals, absence of envy, knowledge of the Atman as distinguished from the body, and bliss of the Atman consciousness. He had 2 wives, by the first of whom he had 9 sons, all noted for their exemplary conduct, knowledge of the Vedas, handsome appearance, generosity, and such other qualities as he himself possessed. By the second wife, he had twins, a boy and a girl. And it is said that the second wife's son was Bharata, reborn after his death as a deer, the assumption of this Brahmana body constituting his final birth. So he was born. So this is what happens. So at least when you do not fall in the next birth, you get a birth where you will be born amongst pious people who will be practicing spirituality. So in this, he was born into this Brahmin family where this person was a pious person, and he was chanting. And not only that, his brothers, what happened was his brothers all were adept in Vedic chanting, and they went to school to study the Vedas and all these things. But what happened with this boy, who was born as a twin with his sister, and from his second wife of the great Brahmin Pandit. They were talking about his qualities, right? And he was such a very good person. So that's why he was born into a very good family, where he would also get that kind of a circumstance where he could do all his practices. That's what they say. You are born into a family where you will be, will have that kind of a, atmosphere to do your spiritual practices. But what happened was, it is said that Bharata, when he was born, he did not cry, because he was in one sense he was quite realized, and or not only that, what happened was, even in his birth, he was found to be very allergic to the company of his relatives. So he would not mingle with his relatives. And he was always mentally contemplating on the Lord's feet through hearing, remembering and recounting his excellences, which destroy one's bondage of karma. Ever remembering the experiences of his past birth through the Lord's grace, he was constantly vigilant against new obstacle, and in order to disassociate himself from the company of others, he put on the air of an inebriated man, a senseless man, and a man without sight or hearing. So that's what he did. He was born, and when he was born, he wouldn't speak. He did nothing. And everybody thought that this child could not speak, and he had no hearing, and he was hearing impaired or sight impaired, and he was just sitting there. So in this janma, this particular birth, that's what he did. Again, when he was born, what did he do? He made sure that he would not acquire new karma. And how does one acquire new karma? But by like when the experiences come to you every day in each and every different forms, you react to it, right? Suppose, I'll just give you an example. When a man comes and he shouts at you, internally what happens? You get angry. And sometimes you cannot control your anger, you retort. And then the man starts shouting at you more, and it might end up in a fist fight or even killing each other. So suppose this man comes and you don't react at all. You just sit there and just watch everything as if it's a movie. Then what happens? After some time, he'll keep shouting and shouting, and then he'll go away. So this is what Bharata did in this birth. He did not even react to anything. What he did, he was saying that, eager that his son should excel him in virtue, his father decided to put him through all the preparatory disciplines that a Brahmana should undergo. The ceremony marking the end of his education. He first had his Upanayana thread, the thread ceremony performed. Some of you must have seen that Amma performs that. And tried to teach him various purificatory rites like Achamana, in spite of his being a senseless boy. But Bharata performed all these rites in an indifferent manner, even in the father's presence, so that the father might soon give him as hopeless. With the idea of teaching him the Vedas, the father first instructed him in the Gayatri Mantra, combined with the Vyahritis and Pranava. But even after 4 months of teaching, the boy could not recite them properly. The father had deep affection for his son, who is to be looked upon by a father as a replica of one's own self. He therefore wrongly thought that it was duty to teach his son, even against his will, all the duties of a brahmacharin, like purificatory rites, Vedic study, observances of vows, disciplines of life, service of a teacher, performance of homa, that a fire ceremony. He tried his best to do so, but failed. So years passed away by the father, unaware of his passage on account of his engrossment in household affairs. But ever vigilant time soon swallowed him up in death. So what happened was, the father tried to teach him all the things, like the Gayatri mantra, teaching him to do his daily rituals. Like when you're a Brahmin, you have to do the Sandhya Vandanam 3 times a day. So the father was teaching him all these things. I mean, they did not know who really he was. They did not understand who he was. They thought he was just a deaf and dumb person, but he was a realized being. And why does a realized being need to chant mantra? Right? Just like Amma says to us, she cannot read the Bhagavatam because she cannot go past the first line. When she just reads the first line, she goes into samadhi. How can this? She has imbibed what is said in the Bhagavata. She's the goal, and what Bhagavata says, she has become that. So there is no need for her to learn anything, because she has become so. And she cannot recite a mantra, because why? I mean, it's not that she cannot, she can recite, but there is no need for her to do that. Correct? So what in this boy similarly did not have to do anything, because he was already there. And his father did not know what to do with this boy who had pretended to be a complete idiot and who would not talk or react to anything or interact with other people. And they did not know that he was in the height of bliss. And so they tried to teach him so many things, but the boy would not learn anything. So what happened in the course of time, his father also was swallowed by death, and his father passed away. And thereupon, the second wife of the Brahmana entrusted her 2 children to the elder wife, and herself accompanied her husband in death. So the boy's mother, in this birth, he was known as Jada, and he was known as Jada means corpse, and one who behaves like a corpse. That's what it is. So what happened was, he was passed on by his mother to the other wife of his father, and that is his stepmother. And the mother also followed his father in his death. In those days, there were there is a ritual, a ceremony where the wife would follow the husband in his death. And sometimes what happened was, the wife would commit suicide in the funeral pyre of the husband, because she wouldn't want to leave after her husband passed away. So they were so in love with each other, and they considered themselves as a part of one another. So that was the reason. And nowadays it's a different story. I don't want to go there. So the Jada Bharatas, that is Bharata's mother, passed away along with his father, which was actually a blessing for him, as we see the story in the next session. So we'll stop here for today. Om Amriteshwari Namaha.
audio input?
Two, active.
Yeah.
I don't know which one that is, but that usually. So the Sanramon guy said, you have to delete the audio input and re-add it in the source section. Take out.
Yeah, I did that.
So we did that already.
What is the
Go
thing
to
is-
OBS settings and then hit the audio tab, and then on the mic auxiliary one, select the mic.
Yeah, I did that. All that.
Because otherwise we have to figure it out.
चैतन्यमयी सत्यमयी अमृतेश्वरी रसामृत वर्षिणी मादा अमृतानंदमयी प्रेम भक्ति संदायिनी मादा अमृतानंदमयी मादा अमृतानंदमयी समदमदायिनी मनलकारिणी अमृतानंदमयी सददं मम हृदि वसदा देवी अमृतानंदमयी मादा अमृतानंदमयी पदिदोद्धार निरंतर हृदये अमृतानंदमयी परमहंस पद निलये देवी अमृतानंदमयी मादा अमृतानंदमयी हे जननी जनि मरण निवारिणी अमृतानंदमयी हे सृजन परिपालिनी जन अमृतानंदमयी मादा अमृतानंदमयी सुरजन पूजित जय जगदम्बा अमृतानंदमयी सहज समाधिषु धन्ये देवी अमृतानंदमयी मादा अमृतानंदमयी मादा अमृतानंदमयी मादा अमृतानंदमयी ओम जय जय जगजननी वंदे अमृतानंदमयी मंगल आरती मादा भवानी अमृतानंदमयी मादा अमृतानंदमयी मादा अमृतानंदमयी जय बोलो सद्गुरु माता अमृतानंदमयी देवी की जय। असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय ओम शांति शांति शांतिः ओम लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो